All right, everyone. Well, thank you for joining us for another panel roundtable for Something We Can Film Festival. We are doing feature directors. We have Ed over here. Ed, if you want to introduce yourself and what film you're representing.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name's Ed Greenberg. I'm the producer and director of the feature film The Renata Road.
Awesome, awesome. So yeah, let's get started about the Renata Road. So kind of give people who haven't watched it yet a quick little summary about it.
So The Renata Road is about a man. He goes unnamed. We never find out exactly who he is. Who's staying in a hotel, and he wants to be left alone, left in seclusion. But very slowly, he gets drawn into the lives of the other guests who are staying, and also the management who are behind the scenes. And it slowly starts to transpire that everybody is connected in this twisted kind of conspiracy. And despite his better judgment, despite his better will, our stranger is forced to interact with everybody and ultimately try to save the hotel maid, who seems to be the focal point of everybody's rather twisted attentions.
Awesome, awesome. So going a little bit about your backstory, you are an actor turned director, and this is your first feature film. So what kind of spurred you to want to make a feature?
I think it was a natural progression from my career. You're absolutely right. Yeah, I started off as an actor, and I think like most actors, that's all I ever wanted to do. And then I got the opportunity to direct. I was a stage actor. I got the opportunity to direct a play, and I did that, and everything changed. I was like, oh no, I don't want to be an actor anymore. I want to be a director. This is so much better. And so I did. I started directing theatre. Then I got my degree and my master's in film and started directing some films. This is even better. This is fantastic. I'm going to direct movies. So I directed a few kind of off the wall psychological short films. And they were received very well and very successfully. Did various tours, various festivals. I even started lecturing in film as well. And just as a progression from that, it was like, right, I want to take these ideas and these concepts that I've been exploring over like 6-7 years of short filmmaking, and do something bigger and try and bring that more into the mainstream, where we can attract a wider audience, get it out there in front of more people. And so the Renata Road was born off the back of all of that. It's been just a crazy evolution, but it's been a very natural, organic process to get from where I began in my humble days treading the boards to behind a camera making movies.
So what kind of made you, like you said, you went from actor to director and theater to theater actor to film. So what drew you to want to be a director to film in comparison to theater? Because I also have a background in theater. So I also I think there's a lot of people, a lot of actors, a lot of directors, producers who come from that background. So what drew you from theater to film?
Well, I've always had a fascination with film, and that goes back to earliest memories of childhood, because my father was crazy about movies. He grew up in the Ray Harryhausen era, and he knew him in passing, which was great. I got to meet him at a very young age when I couldn't appreciate who this man was. But my dad used to sneak me into the cinema and watch films that I probably shouldn't be watching because he loved them and he thought it was harmless fun, and it showed me Terminator when I was far too young. My mother was realistic about it, but he loved movies, and so he showed me all of these fantastic films that maybe most people in their childhood wouldn't normally watch because it's not their era growing up. But I had this whole wealth of movies that I got shown, so I always had this love of film. But when I was growing up, there wasn't really the opportunities to get educated in film, to do a degree or to just learn about film at school. It was all theatre. There was no movie making. There was no university courses for film practitioners that were out there. So I focused on other creative outlets, which was mainly theatre. I got into that when I was at school, really enjoyed that. We had a professional theatre director and producer come on board when I was in sixth form, which was A levels. I'm not sure what they're called these days. And he was brilliant. A guy called Colin Snell. We set up a theatre company together called In Your Space, and we went all over the country doing festivals in theatre, and that was brilliant. And I did the whole drama school route and started treading the boards all over the place, and it was brilliant. I absolutely loved it, but I still always had this love of film. Whenever I had the opportunity to go somewhere and watch something, I very rarely went to the theatre. It was always to go to the cinema to watch something. I was always raiding the DVDs in the shops and Blu-rays when once they came out. Now all the digital stuff. So I always had that love of it. But again, there wasn't the opportunities when I was starting out my career. And so it was more chance and good fortune that I just had having to meet the right people along the way that opened up the right doors. So, actually directing theatre was just somebody gave me the opportunity to do it. So, they needed somebody who said, oh, we've got this play that we've written, we want to put it on, we need a director. Would you like to have a try? And so I was like, yeah, sure, because I directed something while I was at drama school, and that went down very well. And so off the back of that, I directed some other theatre stuff, and then somebody who knew me said, oh, I'm making this short movie, would you like to direct it? Sure, I'll give it a go. And it's not the best piece of work that I ever made, and I'll probably never show it to anybody. But it was my first experience in making film, and I realized this is exactly where I wanted to be, and it's where I've wanted to be since I was a child, and my dad was taking me to see all those movies. So this is what I really, really want to do. So I went back to education, got my degree, got my master's, and started making films.
Awesome. So you talked about like Terminator being one of the first films you watched as a kid. What were some of your kind of movie inspirations? And I know you've also talked about David Lynch being one of those directors that you love to follow. But what were some of the films and also directors that you kind of looked up to help you with your shorts and all of that, and your career overall, who you kind of followed through with?
I mean, as a movie goer, there's not much that I don't enjoy and won't watch. But the Spielberg movies were the stuff that I grew up with. Jurassic Park, Indiana Jones, all of those were great. But as a filmmaker, those weren't the sorts of films that I wanted to make. I loved watching them, but I didn't want to make them. So the first film that really truly inspired me was Un Chien Andalou by Louis Buñuel. I saw that completely out of context, not as a film student or film graduate, just in passing. And I just thought it was one of the most fascinating films I had ever seen, because I had no clue what it was about, but I knew the filmmaker knew what it was about. But it had this wonderful imagery throughout, this great sense of mystery to it as well. And it just left you asking all of these questions that you wanted answers to. But it was just exciting not to know and to have those conversations with people. And linking that to kind of David Lynch, I remember when I first saw Mulholland Drive, I had exactly the same kind of experience with that. That was in my drama school days, and I watched that with a few friends. And again, we were just glued to the screen for the entirety of that. And then at the end, we were just talking about it for God knows how long, hours afterwards. What was it about? Why did this happen? What was going on? And all of us are in agreement, well, it means something. All of this has purpose. But what is it? What is it? And only the director knows. And Lynch was great because he never told anybody. He was in that wonderful position where it was very new. He was bridging the surrealist into the mainstream, and he got away with it. And there wasn't all the live streaming and interviews that we have now, where it's very hard to kind of avoid questions about, so what is it all about? What would it explain this plot to us? But it was great. And, people don't really want to know the answers. They want to question it. They want to come up with their own solutions, but they don't necessarily want to know. So those two directors, Buñuel and Lynch, really, really had a huge influence on me. But also more of a kind of mainstream movie, Lost in Translation, Sofia Coppola. That is probably my favorite film of all time, because it's just a fantastic piece of direction and characterization. Bill Murray, Scarlett Johansson are just phenomenal in that, and the way they make you feel and empathize with the characters and the emotional journeys that you go on, it speaks to so many people on so many levels. And so I really enjoyed how you can get actors to get to that level of depth and connection where they don't really need to say much to each other, but they can convey so much just in a look, just in a little action that they do. And there's wonderful moments in that movie, where they're laying on the bed and they just touch fingers or touch toes. And it just takes you to a whole other level, and you get such a deeper understanding of these characters. So those were kind of two things that I really enjoyed, that I wanted to gel. I wanted to find a way to kind of bring those together, that kind of surrealist, psychological nature of Buñuel and Lynch into the kind of mainstream characterization era of somebody like Coppola and Lost in Translation. And that's what we've strived to do with the Renata Road, is to make something that's both cerebral and psychological, but is really deeply about the characters and their motivations and who they are, and giving the actors as well that freedom to explore who these people are.
So how is that with being an actor turned director? So now you're directing these actors, and like you've done the acting part before, so did you find that gave you better directing skills because you're telling someone something that you've done before of that?
I think it definitely gives an advantage, because you understand the language and you understand the motivation and the process that actors have to go through. I think, like any job in any industry, you expect that the person that you're hiring, be it the joiner or the plumber to come and fix your tap, or your gardener, you just expect them to know how to do that job. You don't take into account that they've had to do training and go through a process of their own learning to get there. And that's the same for actors. I think a lot of first-time directors, when they're very first starting out, and students as well, just expect that actors can act. And they can't. They can get there, they'll get to a performance, but no actor just walks out, knows their lines and knows how that character should be portrayed. There's a process, and that's what we have rehearsals for. And that's great coming from a theatrical background, because you get that huge luxury of rehearsal. You tend to do more rehearsal than you do performance of it. So you understand how you get from point A of first getting that script and it's just words on a page, to that final product where your character is alive and they understand who they are. They understand what motivates every line of dialogue and the thought process that goes on behind that. So yeah, there is a huge advantage to having come from that background, because you already understand what the actor wants from you as a director. And so that's a big hurdle that's overcome straight away.
Oh yeah. And you also for Renata Road, you also wrote it too. So how was that also a second level of, like, you're directing, you're also the one who wrote it too. So that's an extra level of communication to your actors about, again, what you're trying to get to them.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't write it alone. So there was three guys who actually did the bulk of the work of actually putting pen to paper, and they were great. Alan, Greg, and Chris, who wrote the film. I collaborated with them on the story and the edits and the revisions of the script. There's not much that was me putting pen to paper. That's their department. That's what they love to do. That's what they're trained on. So yeah, the story was developed together. Yeah, we wrote it together, but the actual holding a pen and writing something down, that was those guys who I can't give enough credit to. But it certainly helps when you've got that creative control over the concept and growing that concept into whatever your product is going to be. It helps a lot, because you already instinctively understand who these people are in your film, who these characters are, why they're in the world, why they're doing what they're doing, why do they say this line, and that's really difficult when you get a script raw. Somebody sells you it and they convince you that it's a good story and you're on board. You're like, yeah, this is a great story. but trying to figure out why people are doing what they're doing, what's going on in the background, what's the mental process, is really, really, very, really very difficult. Very difficult. And that's, again, when the rehearsal process is so vitally important. If you're coming into a script raw, you have to have that time to work with the actors to really start from scratch, because you're finding the answers to a lot of those questions about, well, why do I do this at this point? Why do I pull out the knife at this point? Why do I get so angry? You're having to find those answers together on the whole to be able to accurately create the motivation for your characters. You've got that luxury when you've helped to write something, you have written it yourself, that you already know why. Because you've already made those decisions somewhere in the back of your head. The brain has already come up with the reason why somebody is doing it. So yeah, that really, really does help a lot. But I guess, for people who maybe are watching this or are asking the question, well, how do you do that then? If you get that script raw, how do you make that easier? The simple solution is talk to the person who wrote the script in the first place, because they know why they did it. So when you've got questions about the motivation of characters and actions, ask the person who wrote it. They'll be able to tell you.
And we talked about this a little bit in the experimental panel too. But when, again, like you've with psychological stuff too, when you have interpretation that you don't know how the audience is going to take it. How is it with trying to do that with the crew, of making sure everyone, the crew, the DP, the actors, are all on the same page of trying to give a message or trying to give a thought or vision, but at the same time, like, people could interpret it differently?
Yeah, just clear communication from the start is really important. If you're really short on time, really short on budget, yeah, sometimes you're going to get your crew on board and just turn up to start filming this stuff because it's out of necessity. And then you just kind of have to hope and pray that you prep your crew well enough. But if you've got the time, you want your heads of department on board as early as possible in that kind of creative process to be able to convey your concepts to them. And you're right, when it's something like this that's so psychological and so dependent on what isn't being said by the characters, you have to help those people who are going to have something creative put on the screen, or certainly those who are designing something creative that's going to be on the screen. They have to be on the same page as you. They've got to understand why it's there, why a certain color is so important, why certain props are actually vital to be there. So it's communication all the way, and any successful film is based on communication. If that breaks down, the film breaks down. But convey your ideas as clearly as possible to somebody. And it doesn't matter if they don't get it 100%, as long as they understand what you're trying to achieve and what your end goal is and what the motivation for that is, they will be able to put their opinions forward and help you to create the aesthetic or final version that you're striving for. As far as the rest of the crew are concerned, it doesn't necessarily matter whether they understand it or not. It's always fun if they do, but certainly for what we were doing, it was incredibly fun that most of the crew who weren't part of the creative process didn't understand what was going on. They knew the general plot of the movie, but they had no idea what was motivating a lot of these actions. So some of the scenes that are a bit off the wall and a little crazy that happen in the film, the looks on their faces while we're setting them up and while we're filming them is just bliss, because you just watch them and it's like, what? And I think the huge dining room scene that comes in the midpoint of the film, where it's this bizarre floor show with a ventriloquist act and the comedy stuff and the singing, that was just people. The crew were just silent and just kind of transfixed to what was going on. Going, this isn't normal. what is happening here? And they'd all be coming to you with questions afterwards, saying, "What's that all about? What's happening there?" So, watch the film, and you'll get a better idea.
It's funny with that too, because most likely you had to film out of sequence too, so they're probably even more confused because they're just
absolutely right. You get all the complex stuff done as early as you can, as quickly as you can in the process, and so we're just kind of bombarding crew with bizarre scene after bizarre scene without any context. I don't understand, why is there a woman in a wheelchair at the top of a set of stairs? Why is somebody feeding her baby food?
How was that with the actors also, with them? Like, they need to find their individual characters, but also like again, the whole thing too with them trying to like, especially like CJ, for him, since he's the title character, again, how was that? Because he is the MC character. He's the character that is witnessing everything. He's the avatar character for the audience. He's
Yeah.
witnessing things as well. So how was that work with CJ to making sure, like, again, having those reactions and stuff at the same time?
Yeah, CJ's brilliant. He's an extremely meticulous actor, and he will do his research, which is brilliant. And when we first made it, it was great because he was the only person who came to the audition who told me what the title of the film meant. And that was really good to see because, you know, people just take titles of films for granted, but everything in our film had meaning and had purpose. You know, every line of dialogue, every bit of action. And in comes CJ saying, "So this is what your film title means. Am I right?" I'm like, brilliant. Okay, you're off to a flying start, which was great. But once we started talking with CJ about who his character is, what's motivating him, what his backstory is, which is kind of, it's vital to the performance and to the audience to understand what happens in the film. It's all about who this character is, which isn't explicit in the film. Once CJ understood that and explained to him exactly what was going on, who it was, he went off, he did his research, he read relevant books on psychology and emotion and the way that people work and the thought process that people go through. And he'd bring all of that into the rehearsal room, right? I've been reading about this, I've been looking at this, and this is what X, Y, and Z say. And it all started to align with the research that we'd done for the character and for the film as well. And that's great because then it starts to become this collaborative organism that starts to grow, because I know what I want. I know why people are doing what they're doing in the film. But when actors start bringing something in and it aligns, it starts to add new layers to it and starts to add more nuance to those individual characters. So CJ was absolutely brilliant for that, as were the rest of the actors as well. But I think it's all films when you're working with actors, trust is crucial. I think we probably had this in other meetings and conversations in other panels, but your actors have to trust you as a director. And the more experience you've got as a director, the easier that starts to become, because one, they can see your reputation, and two, you talk it. Everything that comes out of your mouth when you're explaining about the film and talking through how you want scenes to work, and just the overall process of the film, the actors see you talking from a place of confidence and a place of knowledge, and the trust is there. You know, trust is always there at the beginning with actors. It's there to be lost. And for those students who might be watching this, you know, that's something really, really important. If you've not done your research and you don't understand your own film well enough, the actors will pick up on that very quickly, and that's when the trust is lost. And if you haven't prepped well enough and your crew don't know what they're doing, they'll see those flaws and they'll slowly start to lose confidence in your film. But if you've planned it correctly and you put everything into place and it's a well-oiled machine, your actors will grow in trust, because ultimately all the actors want to worry about is their performance and their work with the director. And once you're on set, that's really what that relationship is for the director as well. It's the director and the actors. That's it. Everyone else should know their work and their roles and be able to execute that well. And I was very lucky with this. It's an ensemble film. There's no small roles in it. You know, I think a cast of 7. But each of those actors needed to know what their purpose was and what their place was in the film. And that took some work, you know, to help them to get there, but they were enthusiastic about it. And I think the great thing with works like this, and when we were talking with the experimental panel earlier, is films like this are a creative process, you know, and actors love something that's a little bit different, and will challenge them in their process. And we certainly did that with this. We certainly challenges at them. But one of the things that we also did, because the psychology behind everything that's happening was so vitally important, most of the characters exist in their own little world, their own little bubble. They're all guests in their own rooms, up to their own actions and activities. I thought it was a nice idea if none of the actors knew, in terms of their characters, what the other characters were getting up to, unless they had to physically interact in the film. So everyone had the option of having the full version of the script, but I I pitched it to them. I'd quite like you just to have your scenes, and that's it. So you don't know what is happening with everybody else, and you concentrate on the motivations for who your people are and why they're doing what they're doing. And they loved that, and they jumped on it, and I think it brought a lot to it, because then once they started to see the other scenes that were being filmed, they started to realize what their place was in the overall story of the stranger, CJ's character, through the film, and what they were all putting him through. And their character, the lead actor and the character in the film, gets put through the ringer. He goes through a lot.
How I'm curious, how many of the actors said, "Okay, I'll just take this one"? How many were like, "Actually, let me see the full thing, just in case"?
None of them wanted to see the full thing. It was always there for them. They can have it whenever they liked. But they really enjoyed the process, and I think they trusted that I knew what I was doing, what I wanted from this film, and what I wanted from them. I think it doesn't hurt that I was an actor as well, so I could speak the language to them. They enjoyed that, because it was a slightly different way of working, and they could start to piece this jigsaw together themselves as they were doing it, and get this sense of what this mystery is and what their purpose is in it. So it was really fun process, and all of the actors who were in it gave it 110%, and I think that shows in the final product.
Oh yeah, it definitely shows. And speaking more of the process, again, this is your first feature, but before that, you've done some shorts. So how was that as a director, jumping from doing shorts to doing a feature?
It's scary, because it's so much bigger and you have so much more responsibility. Everything is kind of the same, just it takes longer, and you kind of have to multiply how much time you're doing by about 5 or 6. You make your short movie and it takes you 5-6 months to do it, shorter sometimes depending on the level of it. But then you want to make a feature film where you 6 times. It takes a couple of years. Money is great if you've got it, because that you buy people and you buy time. Is fab, but we don't, and most people screening at festivals, we didn't have money. We crowdfund, and we get the money and we scrimp it together where we can, and we invest a lot of our own into it, just to get the thing made. So it takes a lot longer, because you haven't got the funds to be able to do it, and you're pulling in favors, and you're asking people, and all of that is much easier when you're saying to people, right, can you give me a week of your time? Can you give me a couple of days of your time, because we're going to make this short movie? You start making a feature film and you're asking for a month of somebody's time, a couple of months of somebody's time, and that's a lot harder, because people can't necessarily afford to do it, or you've got to start making it part-time and doing it in your spare time, and that certainly impacted our edit process when we were in post-production. Filming was good, we shot that in a really nice tight time frame, but we hit a few snags in post. We had a shifty round of crew just because of time restraints and other people finding paid work mainly in other spaces. So a lot of post-production was done by people doing it in their spare time around other work and other jobs. So the length of time it took us to actually get the post-production done grew and grew and grew. But we've got the luxury as independent people making films that we don't have necessarily a time frame for getting something complete. You want it to be as good as possible, so you allow it to be made when it gets made within reason, and we did. And the final product, again, I think really shows that time and effort that was put in. Yeah, great. Somebody wants to give me a few million and we'll make it in a year for you, fab. But if we're making things that aren't and under more restraint, it's going to take us longer. But the wonderful thing is we're not answerable to anybody but ourselves, and so you have that creative freedom and luxury to make products that really give you pleasure and give the audience pleasure and the crew pleasures as well.
So you mentioned earlier again how this was crowdfunded. This was you guys used Kickstarter for it. How was that process of collecting money of like, you really want to do a project and you're hoping people will donate and stuff. And then trying to convince people like this is something you want to invest your time in, like saying the reels, trying to do that. How was that process?
Yeah. I think a lot of people go into crowdfunding fairly naive. It's been around for quite a while now, so maybe not as much as when we were crowdfunding this. Again, certainly working with students, people think that they can just put a project up there on whatever platform and people will come. It doesn't really work that way. You have a look at the projects that have done really, really well, and they've done marketing for the best part of 6 months before it, and everybody already knows about it to jump on it and on day one, which is really what you need. But even if you're not somebody huge who's using crowdfunding, you're relative nobody in terms of the industry, you still have to do that. If most of your funding is going to come from friends and family, which it does at the small scale independent level, you still have to do all of that pre-publicity. You still have to get the page set up, get some kind of web presence ready, and tell as many people about your film as possible, and get on forums and get on movie forums and let everybody know well in advance so that they know your project's coming, because people don't just find this stuff. And if they do, it's part of a huge plethora of projects that are already out there. So why are people going to stop and look at yours? So that's really difficult. So that was a learning curve for us. We certainly could have done a lot more in that kind of pre-publicity, but we were on it during the campaign. We did do pre-publicity, not as much as I think we should have done, but the people who got on board with it loved it, and they became part of a family, because it was this close-knit community of people who did it. Fans of CJ. Certainly, and other fans of movies that are similar to ours, who wanted to see more kind of cerebral content and creative, challenging content, jumped on it because it wasn't like anything that had been pitched before. So we got a really good following. But, those of you who are looking to crowdfund, don't be fooled. It's a full-time job once you're doing it. If you've got somebody on PR for you, brilliant, in marketing, because then that will be their job. But I remember when we did this, the campaign ran for a month, and that whole month, all I was sitting on the computer doing social media, talking to the backers, talking to people who were asking questions backwards and forwards. And I had no idea quite how much work that would be. But I did it, and it was full time for that month. But it was really good. It was really fun. It was really fun to do. And I don't regret any of it, because I was doing most of that. I got to know most of the backers really well, and we'd have conversations backwards and forth, and we'd share messages, which gave the whole production this real kind of family feel. It really felt that everybody was a part of it, and everybody was being rewarded just by the fact that this movie was getting made. And I think that's great. That's great. But it's scary, and it is a lot of work.
And on the flip side of that, with the crew, like you talked about before, crew would also have to, dedicate a month to it. Some of them didn't know the full vision. How was that whole process of getting a crew together, that some of them don't know the vision? Some of them, it's how much of a struggle was that?
Yeah, it comes with getting the right people on board early. I was very lucky to get Beth Norwood on board, who was my first AD. She came on board very early, and she was just brilliant at taking that workload and putting out the feelers and finding people to come on board and do it. And when you haven't got much money and you can't pay industry rates, or you're doing projects that are expenses only, whatever it might be, you are limited on who you can potentially get on board, because people, with experience have got lives and careers. Now, sometimes you get lucky and they'll take a career break and they'll come on board because they love what you're doing. But more likely, you're probably looking at students and graduates who are still trying to forge their careers, still trying to get their foot on the ladder, who will come and do it. But we had people on board who do have careers, who are working in the industry, who just really enjoyed the concept, and they're out there and they're working, but they wanted to do more. They wanted to get some of those creative juices flowing. Nick, who did the visual effects for it. Now, there isn't a lot of visual effects needed in this, you know, but there were some things that were required. Nick, Nick, I hope you don't mind me name dropping, has done some incredible work for some very big franchise things involving spaceships and wars and stars. And he's done visual effects on that. And he came and did my little movie and took time away to do it for not much, you know. And I did say to him, I said, why? Why are you doing it? Because you don't need me. You don't need me. And he says, but I get to be creative. I get to not just be one name in hundreds that are going up the screen. I get to be the one now, you know, especially working in visual effects. You watch the end of any visual movie that's visual effects, and, you know, pick a Marvel film, watch the end of it. 10 minutes of those credits are just all the people doing the special effects, right? And you're suddenly one name in all of that, whereas 15 years ago, you were one name in like 10 or something. He was one name out of one visual effects person on my film, and he got to be creative and solve some really interesting problems that I threw at him that needed solving. And he thoroughly enjoyed it, and that was great. I hope he'd work with me again.
That's awesome. It's always humbling, and sometimes you see that with people that want to do smaller projects because it's just funner sometimes to do smaller projects like that.
Yeah.
So we'll wrap up with one last question, which we kind of already asked in the experimental, but we'll ask it again anyway. So what kind of so you've got your production company Beyond the Bar. What type of upcoming projects do you have?
So we've got another feature film that is currently in the screenwriting process. So that's really exciting. I'm working with Alan, who was one of the screenwriters on Renata Road. So at the moment, it's going under the working title of Ruin, and it's about an up-and-coming actor who's on the brink of kind of launching his career with his next project. But he starts to receive these video messages that show footage of films that he was in when he was younger that, you know, perhaps aren't going to do his career any good. But the problem is he has no recollection of ever doing this work or ever being in these films. So he starts to investigate where they're coming from and who it is that might be trying to derail his career. But as he does so, kind of his world starts to collapse around him as he gets drawn into this kind of seedy underbelly of the world. But similar to Renata Road, it's a psychological mystery thriller. So all of those psychological kind of tropes are in there. And again, it's going to scratch the heads a little bit. It's going to bust the brain. But it is an enjoyable movie. We say it's going to be similar to if 8mm met Lost Highway. So it's going to be fun. It's going to be very different to Renata Road for those of you who've seen it. A little more mainstream, but certainly it's going to have all of those Ed Greenberg kind of tropes of the psychological stress that goes on in there.
That'd be awesome. When you finish it, you gotta submit it to this. Submit it again.
Yeah, back to you guys. Back to something wicked with absolute pleasure, because it's been a great festival, and I thoroughly enjoyed watching all of the movies and just being a part of it.
So actually this will be my last question. What type of, going from your first feature going to your second, what things did you learn from your first time around doing the feature that you're going to bring to your second, that also, and another question type sense, what would you recommend to other filmmakers who have been maybe doing shorts or thinking about doing a feature for the first time? Would you give a recommendation or advice to them about?
Tricky questions. Advice to filmmakers in general will always be do your research. First off, about your movie. What is your film? You know, you've really got to understand what it is. What is it about? And that's not just what is the story, but it's what are the layers to it? What's going on under the surface? You know, now you might be trying to make a blockbuster Hollywood movie, and maybe the underlying theme is just about family and love and affection and a way to treat each other, and that's great. Or you might be doing something a little deeper, a little darker, where it's more about philosophy and psychology and what motivates people and desire and repression that's there. But you have to understand that when you're creating your film, you know, either as part of that writing process or by speaking to the actual screenwriter, if it's not your project initially, and getting that, understand exactly what your film is about. Because if you don't, nobody else is gonna. So I'd say that first and foremost, that's the most important thing. But transitioning from the shorts to the features, just know how huge a bite of the apple you are going for. It is, whatever your project is, it is going to be your life for a long time. And if you're juggling it with other work, it will impact, you know, as much as you try and juggle the two, it will influence, because it's always going to be on the brain. It's always going to be there. So if you can raise enough money that you don't need to be doing anything else other than whatever your project is, brilliant. But if you can't, just be aware of that time frame, because you're really going to have to juggle it. And then get your heads of department in as early as possible into the process, you know, near to when your film is written or just as it's written and you want to start going into your pre-production. You know, get those heads of department on so they're fully on board. They understand exactly what your film is, exactly what you're trying to do. And that might, you know, you might be getting them on board months before filming, but that's fine, because they might not have a lot to do, but at least they can be a part of that process of developing the film and the story. And then when it does come part-time to go, right, heads of department, help me to create this on screen, they know the film that they're making. Yeah, the earlier you can get people on board, the better. But other than that, I would just say enjoy the process and just be true to what your vision is. As independent filmmakers, that's our biggest luxury, is we can make the films that we want. We can make the films that we'd want to see, the films that we'd enjoy to see. And if you can combine that with making films that the wider audience will enjoy and want to see as well, then, you know, you're going to have a very happy life. You know, we're not under the thumb of studios. We don't have producers and execs breathing down our neck saying, I want it this way and I want this person in it. You know, that creativity is free. It's there. And listen to the opinions of the people that you're with and the people that you're working with. They will bring something to the table that you never even considered. And it's yours to reject or accept. But on the whole, you'll probably take some of it on board and go, this is only going to make things better. Let's do it. Embrace it. Embrace those ideas.
Well said. Well, thank you, Ed, for joining, and everyone watching, watch The Renata Road. It's really good. It's very, yeah, it's really good.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. And have a good day.
Thank you very much.